Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to episode 3 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on August 24th, 2023. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For links to items referenced in the podcast, please see the show notes for this episode at straypointers.com. Tonight, we're speaking with Randy Carson, co-owner of C2C Consulting in Cave Creek, Arizona. Randy, you've been a computing professional for quite a number of years, and I thought I'd get you on the show and talk to you a little bit about that journey.
Hey, I'm really glad to be here, Jim. So thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
You bet. So let's talk about your early interest in tech, because I'm sure that it predated the 8-bit computer era.
Yes, well, I think I have to tell you a little bit of a story on myself.
Okay.
Way back in the day, I used to, anything that would look like a gadget, felt like a gadget, smelled like a gadget, I liked.
I see.
So I developed, I actually had, you probably don't know this, but I actually had a nickname in high school of Joe Gadget. So carrying forward from Joe Gadget, it went from, I love Accutron. This is really dating myself, but I love Accutron watches, way back before quartz watches. And I loved anything tech. So ultimately that has led me down the path of anything that smelled like tech. I really liked it. And then ultimately that through high school, I worked, at a bank in Nebraska. And I was working in the bank there, and there was a lot of tech there, mainframe tech, but that's what got me interested in it. And ultimately, before I went totally into tech, there was a little bit of a period of time where I really wanted to teach myself programming, and I didn't. This was back in the Trash 80 days. And a good friend, I was living in Fremont, Nebraska, and a good friend of mine owned the local Radio Shack. And I used to go up there on Saturday afternoons. I bought a programming book, Basic, Trash 80 Basic, bought a book, and I would go home at night and do the lessons, and then go in on Saturday morning and use his computer in the store to test out my lessons, because I couldn't. What were they, like $5,000 for one of those things?
It might as well have been. I think we're talking Randy's being using a term that I don't care for, but we're talking about my beloved TRS-80 computer line from Radio Shack, which some people referred to as Trash 80s, but we all know that they weren't. But yeah, they were. The intro unit, I believe, was around $600, around $599, which was a princely sum when they came out in the late 70s. So it was difficult to kind of justify something of that expense.
Well, I mean, there was no way, shape, or form that any normal human like me, just out of high school, could afford anything like that. So I was just lucky that my friend let me use his computer in the store as my learning experience. And I ultimately turned into somewhat of a salesman. While I was standing there doing my lessons, I would explain it to people.
I bet that happened a lot.
It did. It really did. So that's how I got started into tech, as lowly as that sounds.
Now, you were still in the days before computing, though. You were a ham radio buff, and you were into photography and
goodness, yes,
all sorts of things like that.
My first touch of, a good friend of mine, Mike, he was all about tech also, and he was one of these folks that was very, it seemed to always come easy to him. Electronics, I mean, he was, before he had any real school, and I truly don't know if he had any real official schooling even yet. But he was always taking apart stuff and building radios, and he worked out from crystal radios to transistors, up through the boards, all that kind of thing. And then ultimately he got into ham radio, and he convinced me that I needed to get a ham license. And one of the biggest problems I had back then was one of the requirements to get a ham license was you had to do code. You had to be able
Oh, sure.
you had to be able to, in order to pass your novice, you had to do 5 words a minute. And then I think this has been so long ago, but I think to get your regular ham license, I think you had to do 20 to 25 words a minute, something like that.
Hmm.
And the basic Morse code just did not come to me. I, I don't know why. I probably had some sort of a mental block against it, but I never did really get into the code. So in terms of moving further past, the 20, 25 words a minute and getting my standard ham license,
Hmm.
or, what class, wouldn't have been a class A. I forget what class it was, but it was the first class that you could use to actually do audio rather than coding.
Gotcha.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah. They dropped that requirement for Morse code. Gosh, it's probably been 20 years ago now, but I don't know I think the barrier to entry, the bar to entry is a lot lower now. I just don't know that there's the interest given that the internet had, kind of exploded onto the scene.
Yeah, yeah. I was so interested in that stuff because I was Mike. Uh, when I don't know, this is a long time ago. You remember people used to trade postcards back and forth.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You would say, "Oh, I made contact with so and so." QQ.
Yeah.
I even remember Mike's. I think this is QQ. YELQQH, something like, I don't know. I forget what his call sign was, but anyway, he had postcards from people all over the world, and I was just fascinated by it.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
I was absolutely fascinated, and he also was able. He got to use it a little bit more than I did because after we graduated from high school, he went into the Air Force and spent quite a bit of time in Germany. So he was able to use his ham radio license and skills, not necessarily in the military, but just thinking around when he was in Germany.
Sure. Okay, so let's go back to those days when you had decided that you wanted to you wanted to program computers professionally. What was the sequence of events that followed then?
Well, the first step I took was, and I don't know just exactly how I came to know about it, but Iowa Western Community College back then, and I knew of that. I think because there was some kids that I graduated from high school with that were going to Iowa Western from my area where I grew up in Western Iowa. And I don't think any of, well, I know none of them were in the computer programming, but I knew of Iowa Western, and then I also learned about the computer programming classes. And ultimately, even back then, it had a great reputation.
Hmm.
Iowa Western, as you know, has always had a great reputation. A lot of great professors, a lot of great teachers, a lot of great everything. A lot of good support from the school too, because keeping that type of hardware around for a school that size wasn't easy.
I'll bet.
I don't imagine. So anyway, long story short is, I discovered Iowa Western, and I set my sights on going to programming school at Iowa Western. And back then, I don't know whether they still do it today, but back then you had to take a logic class, or not a logic class, but a logic test.
Hmm.
And I believe that test was reviewed with me by Mr. Curlin.
Sure.
And I don't believe I did as well as I would have liked on the test.
Yeah, really, really quick here. You're speaking of Dennis Curlin, who for
Yes.
quite a number of years was the overseer of that program at Iowa Western.
Yeah. Great man. Great
Yes,
man.
Yes.
And I didn't do as well as I would have liked. And I think the bottom, or I think the break even point on that logic test to get into the programming classes was a C, or the moral equivalent of a C.
Hmm.
If I remember correctly, I just scraped barely by. And I remember to this day, I said, that's probably not as well as I would have liked to have done, and probably not as well as you would have liked me to have done. But I said, if you grant me entrance to this class and to this program, you will never regret it. And I hope he didn't.
I'm I'm certain that he didn't.
So that's how I got into the programming classes at Iowa Western. And then ultimately, I, for some reason, and I feel like I was lucky, I was fortunate, I took to it like a duck to water. It was very easy for me. And not that I didn't study, but it was very easy. It seemed what a word, seemed logical to me. Does that make any sense?
Yep. So, then after graduating from tech school, what was your first professional job?
Oh, this is a great story. I was applying various places around Omaha and submitting resumes and, showing up at the various HR departments and this and that and the other thing, and wasn't having much luck. Like I was getting a lot of the old thanks, but no thanks. Good luck with that. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, kind of thing. So I was getting rather not disappointed, but frustrated, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I know in the Omaha paper, I'm originally from Omaha, Nebraska, and I noticed this little ad in the back of the paper, the want ads. I They must have spent all of about $3 on this ad. I mean, it was like 1 inch tall and maybe one column wide, and it says programmer wanted, blah blah blah. Call this. I don't even think it had a number. No, it didn't. Didn't have a number. Programmer needed. Send your resume to this address. And I thought, well, can't do any worse than I've been doing.
Mhm.
So ultimately, I sent my resume to that address, and I got an interview, and that was my first programming job. From that $3 ad in the Omaha World Herald that they had put in there.
So what type of a system were you coding on at the time?
That machine, that was when I got my experience on NCR gear.
Okay.
I walked in, they were running a NCR mainframe. Company's still there. It's a large grain company in
Hmm.
Omaha, Nebraska, and they run a lot of grain elevators. They do a lot. They've got a deep sea port on the West Coast. They ship grain. It's a big operation, and they were running NCR gear at the time. And I thought, oh my God, I've never seen any of this stuff. And I walked. He said, well, I'm thinking, COBOL's COBOL, right? Well, yeah, kind of. But I went in, and my first job, you're gonna laugh, but my first job had nothing to do with COBOL. It was all Neat 3, and
Okay.
which is NCR's assembler language.
Sure.
And ultimately, it was all Neat 3, and
Which was all new, right? I mean,
it was all new.
they taught you mainframe assembler at Iowa Western,
Yeah.
but when you've seen one assembly language, you've seen one assembly language. They all have their
Oh
nuances,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you had to kind of learn a brand new language, brand new assembly level language on the fly. How did
Yes.
that go?
It was rather. I was working my little tail off. I got to tell you, I would get projects during the day, and then I would study at night. Fortunately they sent me to some schools, and so I was picking up a little bit faster because of the schools they sent me to, but still they expected some productive work out of me too.
Sure.
And I'll never forget, coming out of, people are going to laugh because, I'm an IBM guy. I came out of the IBM world, but I do now know that that's not the only way to skin a cat.
Sure.
I worked for a number of years on the NCR gear, And so the first gentleman I ever met was the systems programmer at this particular company, NCR systems programmer, and his name was Frank. And I went in and I shook his. Went in to meet the programming group as my first day as an official programmer with my fresh white shirt, my stiff tie, my shine shoes, and I think I even took my green flow charting template with me. So I went in there and I said, so somebody introduced me to Frank. I said, well, I'm so glad to meet you. And Frank didn't look all that tall sitting in an office chair, but he got up, and by the time he got finished getting up, he was 7'4". I go, wow, this is his first word out. He had a great sense of humor, and the first word out of his mouth, I don't play basketball. So that was my first introduction to NCR. And of course, coming out of a school that we learned IBM way of doing things, I used to, for about the first 2 weeks, he'd explain, how it was going to happen on the NCR gear. And then I would say, well, this is the way we used to do it on IBM. And then pretty soon Frank looked at me and he goes, you know something, Randy? I don't care. That was my first introduction into a system programmer's way of thinking.
So tell me a little bit about the environment, because it's going to be much different than what people are used to now. Were there punch cards involved in any of this or any of that type of gear?
Not at this particular company.
Okay.
It was all past that at this point, but the computer room was just a little tiny thing. Had a glass windows to keep it out of the office, but it was really just in the corner of our office. There was no raised flooring. And I'll tell you a little bit of this is a true story. I went in there, and I won't name the president's name, but after they got the computers in there, he said, "What's that big red button on the wall?" And we said, "Well, that's something you just want to stay away from." While he said that, he went over and pushed it.
Oh no.
He
Does this release the halon?
The halon cut the power, the flies came out, everything. And it took us, and keep in mind, this is an NCR home brewed, it was fast, but it was an NCR home brewed indexed random access index file to, access our data. And there was nobody in the world that had ever had one of these because they invented it. Frank and his crew invented it.
Mm-hmm.
And when it went down that hard, it wasn't a good thing.
Oh man. I don't think I would have been there at that time.
No, it's we had you were talking about the environment back in the day. We had a blast. We really did have a blast. It was really the days during programming where I like to think that we were all, basically after the same, goals. Nobody was, looking behind your back to see what they could do or none of that. I mean, we didn't, to be honest with you, we didn't even have security on our systems. And when they did that, then we had, oh gosh, 6-character passwords. And I still use one of them to this day on all my super sensitive stuff. So that was the grain company.
So what then would you say was your big break as far as a job? Where'd you go next?
Went back to First National.
Okay.
I had put okay, now I'm going to make all the neat three, or not neat three people, but the RPG people hate me. They decided to go from an NCR mainframe to an IBM System 36. either 36 or 38. I can't remember which. But anyway, it was gonna be RPG. And I have to tell you, Jim, that RPG and I didn't get along either.
Yeah,
I
I get it.
I I, I couldn't get it through my head what the purpose of this thing was. So when they said, "Well, we're going to go to a system 36 or 38, whatever the case was, and we're going to do RPG," I thought, well, my days are numbered. So, and I wanted them to be, but they would have been anyway because I would have never been able to figure it out. Or, well, yes, okay, I probably could have figured it out, but did I want to? No. Remember the little template you had to lay down along the listing to see what you were doing?
I know of the template, but by the time that I had gotten into Iowa Western, RPG had been removed from the curriculum. There were
Good.
there were still shops around here that supported it, but it had just been removed.
Yeah. Well, they made a great decision there.
Yeah, well, there are still places using it. It's still
I
active today. It's the newest RPG though, as I understand it, RPG 4 has and above have been kind of more free form. They maintain a certain level of compatibility with those older versions where you had to
Yeah.
have very yeah, the columns you had to put certain things in very certain columns
Yep.
uh, rigidly. But the new ones are more of a free form syntax.
Well, I I saw what it was all about and decided I needed to run the other way on RPG. But anyway, to continue the story, I put a resume back into First National, and by golly, I got an interview, and I interviewed with another fellow you might remember named Jim,
Hmm.
and there wasn't much of an interview. He said, "Well, what's going to take to get you down here?" And I shot him a number I thought was unbelievably high compared to what I was used to getting and what I knew other people just out of school were getting. And
Hmm.
okay, where do you start? Oh, darn it! I should have shot higher. But that was my and again it was an NCR shop. So because I was working as you know, the bank at that point in time was converting off of the NCR gear onto an IBM system. And so I worked for a number of years still on the NCR side. Because of my knowledge of the assembler world and NCR, I, along with a good friend of mine, Gary, were responsible for running the NCR onlines, which drove the telemachines, the ATM networks, and pretty much everything else that was online. Had a lot of fun.
So then you made a transition when there was an evolution and they moved up from the NCR gear. You moved on to IBM mainframe technology, kind of back to where your formal training,
Right,
had prepped you for.
right.
Um, and was it during those years you had gotten your first PC?
Yes, I got an installment loan to get my first PC.
Yeah.
I know that sounds nuts, but I wanted one. I wanted one in the worst way, and I actually went up to a local bank. I knew the personal bank. They didn't call them personal bankers back then, but I knew the president of the bank, and I said, "How about you float me a personal loan for, gosh, I think it was like $4,000 for this PC."
Yeah.
And he said, "Sure, no problem." So that was the first PC I ever had of my own, and it was one of those what we used to call luggables.
Hmm.
It folded up like a great big sewing machine, and I was so excited.
So then what sort of things did you do? Because now you've gone micro to mainframe and back to micro again.
Yeah, yeah.
So what sort of things did you do then once you got this new PC home?
Well, one of the things I always used to use as kind of a traditional learning experience is I would always write the same program. I would mimic the same program with the assembler language of whatever machine I had.
Hmm.
And it happened to be this crazy little screensaver routine that I had. And so I, first of all, I wrote all that in assembler, and then I got a hold of your traditional PC magazines, and I spent the rest of my life on the weekends. I'm being a little facetious, but I spent a lot of weekends peeking and poking assembler language into the machine so I could have a chess game.
Oh, okay.
And then beyond that,
So,
I
so hold on a second. So you're talking about type-in listings from the magazines
yes,
instead
typing
of
in list
just being able to right click and download a chess game, you had to
right.
laboriously type in rows and rows and rows of if there was a fair amount of machine code in it, you were entering it in basic. You're
Yep,
probably entering a lot of numbers and a lot of commas
yep, yep.
where
With
digits
that,
are easily transposed.
and then you put a ruler underneath it so you don't lose track. And then you tell your wife, "Don't bother me. I'm typing this stuff in. If I lose my place, I'm really in trouble."
Yeah, some of those used to put a checksum number at the end of each line so that as it was reading through the data, it could tell if there was something amiss in the line and you better go back and check it. Some didn't, and you just got to find out when, you were about to, you're about to take the king and all of a sudden everything froze up.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a great point. I don't remember whether any of my games had checksums on a line basis. They
Mhm.
may have. I may have just thought I was a great typist. I don't know.
So, what new languages did you learn then? Obviously, you tinkered with some PC assembly language,
I did.
basic for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I tinkered, and then if I could get a hold of a Pascal, I would play with that. And I played with obviously assembler, and I think at one point in time I managed to come up with a COBOL. Do you think? Oh, gosh, that's a
Oh
long time.
yeah, yeah.
I think it was a Microsoft COBOL or something.
Microsoft sold one, and then there was a budget company that they had sold COBOL and Fortran for both CP/M and MS-DOS,
Yeah.
and one of them was called they called a Utah COBOL, the other was Nevada COBOL.
Oh, yeah. That's
So
right.
it could have been one of those two.
And then I also somehow magically came up with a copy of DBase 3. Well, actually DBase 2
Hmm.
originally. So I taught myself. That was really my first real continuing attention on how to do relational databases.
So you kept using that up through versions of DBase compilers like Clipper, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah, I did. And then ultimately, I don't know what I really liked Clipper because okay, I had a pseudo compile and then you could release your code in some manner of form. But I really liked Clipper, and ultimately I used it quite a bit. I got contracted over the course of those years for a couple custom systems that I did in BASIC.
Hmm.
There was I don't even know if they still exist, but there was a dry cleaning company in Omaha that ultimately wanted to have an inventory control system written, and they had a Model 3 Radio Shack, the bigger one,
Sure.
the one that I could never possibly afford. It was like $8,000 or $10,000 in the book, had all of about, 5 meg worth of hard drive on it, but uh, you know how that goes.
Yep.
So yeah, I wrote a couple custom programs for people, and so I made my money. But I made some money with it. That was the first time I ever made any money with a PC.
So then back at the office, the winds changed, and somehow you found yourself managing a bunch of yahoos who were now PC programmers.
Wild, wild cowboys.
Yep. What was that era like?
I loved it. I loved every minute of it. because it again I had kind of in a sort of way come full circle on my PC interest in.
Hmm.
And as you know, that particular group was doing a lot of custom programming, a lot of custom development, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. We got to do a lot of things that were based on, at least at the time, some relatively, forward thinking sort of things like, network databases, multi-distributed databases, and those kind of things. And as you know, we did it the hard way. We coded it ourselves.
Yep. Yep.
And that was ultimately probably the most fun I ever had was working with that group. I really didn't ever consider myself managing it because there was a lot of people, including yourself, that were we all had our specialties. And when you'd say, "Oh, hey Jim, can you make this thing sing and dance and spit quarters?" Yeah.
So then as time moved on, I think you got involved in what became a nationwide scare called the Y2K problem.
Oh gosh. Yeah. I became part and parcel of the affiliate bank Y2K guy. Uh, they pulled me into the Y2K office, and I was responsible for cruising the world. Uh, the banking organization had several outstate banks, not only outstate, but other state banks. And we also all had to make sure that everybody was being remediated appropriately for Y2K. And so I was responsible for traveling to those organizations on some sort of regular basis. I think I used to try to make a visit at least once a month, if not a little more often in the early days. But I had a regular dog and pony show that I'd have to do because they people didn't understand what Y2K was all about. It was like, and people, oh, the airplanes are going to fall out of the sky. I mean, I'm going, no, no, it's not going to be that bad. But ultimately, as you know, there was some remediation that had to be done. That had it not been done, things would have gone sideways. But I was responsible for cruising the Midwest, talking to the affiliate banks, making sure they had their questions answered, got the resources they needed, and made sure they were still on track. And then that was pretty much what I did for the lead up to the actual Y2K for, oh gosh, I don't know, 18 months, 2 years. I think it was more like 18 months. And then when Y2K came around, the actual, it was pretty anticlimactic, should I say.
Hmm.
I mean, we were all sitting around waiting for something to go wrong. And I guess it was, give ourselves a pat on the back. I mean, it didn't go wrong, didn't go sideways, but ultimately it was just another day.
Yep.
I was expecting something different.
Yep. Yep. Do you remember what happened when you decided to see what Outlook would do if you changed the date on your computer to
Yeah.
post Y2K?
Yeah, it was not happy.
Well, we had an auto delete policy for old email if I remember correctly. So
Yeah.
didn't it pretty much nuke your entire inbox?
Yeah, it cleaned up the world right quickly.
So you were probably the only person who really suffered in the
Yeah,
Y2K, which
I
is
was.
ironic.
I was, yes. I was definitely. But that was there was some, little gotchas like that. You go, oh, I wished I hadn't hit that button. But ultimately, that was what we were there for. The Y2K office. If somebody was going to get shot in the head, technically, it should have been us.
So then where did I know that you kind of left for other pastures at that point. Where did the winds take you?
When I left the bank, I went to work for a consulting company out of Denver, Colorado, and I managed, well, at least initially, I managed the Nebraska region for that company. And they had some they had some really exciting development contracts for the company in Denver. It wasn't so much in Nebraska, but the company in Denver was working on some really neat stuff. So, for example, back in the day, you would have asked me what some of our teams were doing in Colorado, I would have had to. If I told you, I'd have to shoot you because we can talk about it now, but they were doing all the coding for a lot of the Google Maps, being able to hone in and do that kind of stuff. And back then that was a military secret. And then when they finally opened up the GPS accuracy to, oh, what was it? Initially, I think GPS accuracy from the satellites was like somewhere in the same county. I think it was a little better than that. But then they opened it up to, as the highest accuracy they had available at the time, and you could pin it right down to somebody's driveway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the company I was involved with was working on at that point in time was GPS satellite data manipulation consulting.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then that was a company out of Denver. Stayed with them for a couple of years, pretty much until the end of the contract. And then I went from there to a company out in California, which was, they were in well, no, I actually came here. I came to Phoenix initially and went to work for a company that was in the, how do I say it? It was the telecommunications business. So kind of tell you a little bit of a story about the time in Phoenix was growing so rapidly at this point in time that the telecom companies and the telecom industry and it just could not keep up. I mean, there was people out here stringing wires 24/7, for years.
Mm-hmm.
And the company I went to work for out here was in the telecom business. And the particular piece of it that I was involved in is electronic staffing systems, so that because a lot of the wire hangers were temporaries, and because you couldn't afford to have a staff of 8 million people on staff full time. So anyway, they would staff these people on an as needed basis, just in time staffing is what it was. And I was responsible for developing and rolling out the systems that took care of that just in time staffing. And that's how I eventually got to Phoenix.
Okay. So then tell me a little bit about the genesis of your own company and the how the tech that you decided to use in that company, how that kind of formed up.
Sure. Before I started my own company, I was with a company out of, well, as I said, California,
Mm-hmm.
and I was traveling. Oh gosh, I would estimate probably between 90 and 120,000 miles a year in an airplane, and had frequent flyer. I was throwing frequent flyer miles out the windows as I drove by. I had so many, and I eventually got to the point where if you haven't been on the road that much, you don't understand that everybody says, "Oh, yeah, it must be so exciting, traveling all the time." And then somebody that's done that, they immediately it's like, "No, you've never done that, have you?" And so I got to the point where I was very, very fatigued with flying out on Sunday night, flying back on Friday night, and then you get just a few bit of hours, and then you have to start thinking about packing up and going again. So anyway, I was doing that, flying the luck of the Irish. All of my jobs were on the East Coast, and I was currently at that point living in Phoenix. Worked out well. So all my gigs at that point in time were either in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or they were in Woodbridge, New Jersey, and I was involved with the pharmaceutical companies out there. And ultimately, I got tired of flying so many miles, and I thought, well, I think I can do this myself. And that was kind of the germ of an idea that I thought, I think I can do this. I started C2C Consulting. Just on, it really wasn't a plan, as things happen in my life, and I'm sure a lot of other people's lives, think you get to where you get sometimes with no major plan. You just land there because there was a vacuum and you got sucked into it, and they needed something, and you happened to be in the right place. And the way that C2C Consulting was formed was one of my good friends in the animal rescue, who happened to be a horse rescue business, called him and said, "Have you ever done a website?" "Why, yes, I have." "Not." That was the two-sided of my mind talking, because
Mhm.
when you start a small business, you never say no. "Can you do this?" "Yep." And then you stay up all night trying to figuring out how to do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if you don't say yes, you don't get much business. And ultimately, that's how it all started. I started going, yeah, a horse rescue website, yeah, I can do that. And I began researching, how do I do this? And I think the initial year, probably, well, not even that long, probably the initial 6, 7 months that I was building that system, it was, I learned on tonight what I'm going to do tomorrow. And then eventually I got a little bit better and a little bit more knowledgeable and a little bit better and a little bit more knowledgeable. And pretty soon I could make things work. But as you know, in that world, it was all um, web-based. I
Mhm.
chose to use PHP because of the nature. It was tied into a lot of the content management systems that I was looking at and ultimately using.
Mhm.
So I taught myself PHP, which I didn't really get into JavaScript and all that stuff until later on, because I had my hands full with PHP. And truthfully, back in those days, there wasn't a lot of JavaScript going. I mean, there was some, certainly not as much as there is now, or even later on. It was pretty much just naked PHP. And I did that. And probably the first 5 years I was in business, it was all word of mouth, well, Randy does websites. Okay, yeah. Do you make it sing and dance and spit quarters? Yeah, I can do that. And so my nose was growing by the day, yeah, I can do that. It's ultimately, I know it sounds terrible, but it's the way you have to do it to get a business started. And that, roll forward 17 years, we've been doing that for 17 years. And now we're doing, I'm still not totally truthful when I say, yeah, I can do that. But I have to say that less and less all the time. So now we have rolled it into, C2C Consulting. My wife quit her job, and we're now co-owners of C2C Consulting. And she does and I know this is going to be a major surprise to you, but she does all the customer facing stuff, and I'm the guy behind the curtain.
That's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
Exactly.
so what do you do nowadays? What is some of your big tech work that you do nowadays?
I hate to admit it, but I'm doing a lot of package rollouts nowadays. I don't get a chance to do as much custom code as I used to like to get done. Uh, People, and you and I've had this conversation in a different context before. I believe I used to have an expression like, and nobody would ever say to you, "And I'm really proud you wrote that in assembler."
Yep.
It's doesn't ever work that way. So I do a lot of package rollout, not package, but architecture rollouts, and then we hang the drapes, and we paint the walls and do that old stuff and hang it up that way. And on once in a great while, we'll get some custom code that needs to be done, or a little bit of manipulation behind the scenes. But most of my rollouts in today's world are all based on existing content management systems. If it's kind of the middle of the road, not anything too dramatically complicated, I usually use Joomla, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
If something gets a little bit more drastic, I'll occasionally go into Modex, which is a little bit more of a naked architecture, and you just hang in there what you need. And I will, if I need to, support WordPress. It's not one of my favorites. It has some challenges, but for what it does it well. It's just my concern about WordPress is it started out as a blogging platform, and it's grown hair, and it's got 4 legs and 6 arms now, and sometimes you never know where it's coming from.
Yep. Yep. I've heard stories.
And so really my behind the scenes efforts are really focused on keeping the servers going, keeping enough space available. I now lease all my servers from Google. And I think I told you that my Google servers are actually about 6 feet away from Iowa Western.
Oh yeah.
They're in that dark data center right down the street. So it talk about going full circle.
Mm-hmm.
I can feel Mr. Curlin staring down my back as I speak, with all that stuff so close back to Iowa Western. But yeah, all my servers are leased from Google. I buy them by the truckload. I buy them by the gross now, in terms of space. And I used to try to manage them all individually, hosting slots. Now I'm big enough I can have my own servers, and I've got my own mechanisms to manage stuff. And it's a lot more efficient for me because I'm not managing 40. I've got 65 websites that I manage. So instead of cruising around, logging in, logging out of 65 different cPanels, I've got all my own stuff at the right place at the right time, and I can do this very simply with running my own servers. And as I usually say, if I need more server, I just throw another log on the fire, because it's all basically configured and sized dynamically. And if I still have every once in a while I'll get a crazy thought that I want to buy my own. But I'm going to call you the next time I think that. I want you to talk me out of it.
Yeah, that's Joe Gadget talking to you, Randy. You have
Yes,
to recognize Joe's voice.
yes. It's like he's sitting on my shoulder going, "You can do it. You can do it." But yeah, it's I would love to do more coding. I would love to do all of that. But to be honest with you, my money is made now in speed of execution, speed of rollout, and accuracy of requirements.
Sure.
And we actually, not to put any feathers in anybody's hat, but now we've gone from the local horse rescue to one of the sites, and we have multiples that are about the same size, but one of our sites is the Phoenix Metro Chamber of Commerce. So we've got some big boys now.
That's great.
And we went there from the horse rescue business, and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy every bit of it, but I'm still the horse rescue guy. That's where I'm at. That's what I love. I try to take care. I'm an animal guy, so that was right down my alley, was the horse rescues.
So let me ask you, are you past retirement age, the legal retirement age? You don't have to tell me.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm a long ways past that.
So
Can you see
when
my shirt?
oh, there you go. It says I'm 10 in dog years.
That's right.
So
The last time I asked Margaret when I get to retire, she said as soon as you drop dead off of your but I can't sit still.
sure.
I couldn't retire, truthfully.
So what's on the horizon? Is it more of whatever this evolves into, or is there something else that you think you might take an interest in?
That's a great question. I really I don't know how to answer that, because In reality, most of the stuff that I've chanced into over the years, I've either been attracted to it, I've been at the right place at the right time, I've had a lot of good luck that ways. In turn, we were talking about the Chamber of Commerce, site. We are in the process of working with a company out of Ukraine to do all the mobile work. And we're in the process of putting a package together that the fellas that own the big chamber sites can sell to their compadres in other cities.
Oh, okay.
So I'm still behind the scenes on that in terms of producing, the resources to run it, and making sure that the horses are still in the corral. But I'm really thoroughly enjoying working at that level now. So it's fun. I'm developing in kind of a different way, using different resources. Over the course of the years, I had to admit that I couldn't be in 14 places at one time if I was going to scale the company.
Sure. Sure.
Does that make any sense?
Yep, perfectly. Well, Randy, I appreciate your time. It's been a great talk. I really enjoyed having you on tonight. That was great.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
And maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, we have I think between us we have plenty of other stories we need to go back over
Oh,
and make sure we've got our facts straight and
oh
share
yeah,
them with some folks out here. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
all
It's a
right.
goat. It's a goat.
Yeah, there's a story that we'll have to tell everyone another time about everybody's talking about Chat GPT. Randy's first encounter with an AI program. We'll do
Yes.
that. We'll do that next time.
We'll talk about that another time.
Yeah.
Well,
Great.
again, thanks for inviting me, Jim. I enjoyed the heck out of it.
Thanks, Randy. Thanks again to Randy for being on the show. I hope you all enjoyed it. Let's do this again soon. Take care.